Josh, you from the American Anglican Council with another episode in our series on the Daniel Declaration, a call to mission, a place to stand. We're in episode 6, the contemporary implications that we are addressing. And in this, we're going to address the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. Let me begin with this statement. Christian mission is rooted in unchanging biblical revelation. At particular times, however, specific challenges to authentic faith and holiness arise, which require thoughtful and vigorous response. So this is why we're doing this Daniel Declaration. It's a thoughtful and vigorous response to the issues of our day, issues that are different when we issued the first version of A Place to Stand back in 1996. What are some of those issues today? Well, again, I want to hearken back to the issue that I think theologian would say the issue is biblical anthropology. Put that in layman's terms, we're really talking about what does it mean to be fully human, to have human dignity and purpose and significance in life. How do we define that? And as an attorney, you'll not be surprised that I look at the statement that Justice Anthony Kennedy penned in the opinion, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, when they were wrestling with the idea of freedom and human freedom and dignity. And this is what Justice Kennedy wrote. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Now, you'd search in vain to find a more apt description of our secular age. It's not as though Kennedy invented our culture of expressive individualism. No one would fault him for introducing our age of authenticity, to borrow a phrase from philosopher Charles Taylor. But what Justice Kennedy gave voice to is our age's turn to self, to the modern self, to the modern, expressive, feeling-centered, autonomous self as the ultimate authority. And through subsequent decisions of the Supreme Court, Kennedy and others moved to the wrong side of the law, all who recognize authority in the divine lawgiver, or even in our nation's own legal history. In the new legal atmosphere in which we live, God cannot violate the sovereign self. And so if a person says, I don't care what it says in Genesis 1 about God making them male and female, I'm not willing to define myself in those categories, then that must give way to those people's feelings. Tradition may not put boundaries on the sovereign self. Whatever the self determines is right. Whatever the self determines must be acknowledged and accepted by every other self. Now, we're in a different postmodern, post-biblical Christian age in North America. And I would like to commend to you, if you haven't read George Barna's survey of millennials in America, let this statistic sink into you. And that is that of all the people interviewed, those, including people of faith, only 2% could be defined as holding to a biblical worldview. 2% of people between the ages of 18 and 34. We therefore speak to the following issues of our time and culture, and the most important issue of our time must be the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. And so we say, while religions and philosophies of the world are not without elements of truth, Jesus Christ alone is the full revelation of God. In and through the gospel, Jesus judges and corrects all views and doctrines. All persons everywhere need to learn of him, come to know and believe in him, and receive the forgiveness of sin and new life in him, as there is no other name given under heaven by which we must be saved. Citing directly Acts chapter 4, verse 12, and Article 18 of the 39 Articles. As we look and evaluate all of the challenges and issues before us, We place this section here because we must look at every issue first through the eyes of Jesus and not vice versa. We can't look at Jesus through the eyes of injustice and oppression and hunger and poverty. We must look at those issues through the eyes of Jesus because he is the lens, he is the sovereign Lord who is unique and who corrects all views. He's the safe place where we stand and not otherwise. Well, Canon Mark, Canon Georgette, Dr. Adam, it's good to have you with us. We're talking about the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. And one of the things we say in the Daniel Declaration, of course, is that we ought to look at life through the lens of Jesus Christ rather than the lens first of our own experiences. And of course, that raises the issue because most people will say today, why shouldn't we look through the lens of our own experience?
Well, my experience doesn't necessarily teach me anything about the world. It doesn't teach me about what it means to live well, about what it means to live a life of flourishing. My own experience is typically pretty limited. Mm-hmm. It's not something I could even communicate with others, really. Mm-hmm. It's something that belongs to me alone. So my experience is something that always separates me from those around me, those with whom I'm in community, even my closest friends, my wife and my children, my best friends cannot share my experience. Mm-hmm. My experience is mine alone. So what is it that enables us to flourish in community with others? Well, it's understanding what's common, what we have in common, the common good, those things that God has given us to share, that my life is not my own, actually. My life does belong primarily to those with whom I'm in community, has value for them and to them. Their insights into the value of my life can be a great corrective when I don't understand the value of my own life. I mean, this is one of the most important lessons we see in the battle over euthanasia and assisted suicide is you don't affirm the subjective experience of the person who's suffering from depression or mental illness and their own judgment that their life is no longer worth living. No. The opposite. Mm-hmm. Exactly in those situations, it's incumbent upon us to speak the truth. No, your life is valuable, whether or not you happen to value it at this moment or not. Whether or not your experience of your life is one of goodness and richness and value. And so we all need those correctives, right? Because our subjective experiences betray us, right? Mm-hmm. They can often deflect our understanding of what is real and therefore what is true and good.
Right.
I keep seeing this right now in young women. I've been reading statistics about the number of women, young girls, that are transitioning or desiring to not be a female anymore, and I keep thinking about their mindset, which is very self-absorbed, and yet the sense that they don't like who they are, and so their focus is on trying to identify in some new way, and all the while missing the greater purpose of life, which is to live beyond yourself. As you said it very eloquently in terms of what your family brings to you and what you bring to them, is that back and forth. I think our young people, and because of that particular issue with the transgender, it breaks my heart to see how young people, unfortunately, had been taught you can be anything you want to be. Well, maybe there's some rules to that. Mm-hmm. You can't be everything or anything you want to be. But we have given them this sense that they are godlike in saying these things. And the truth is actually the opposite. It's that you were made by God for certain purposes in a certain way with some gifts, but not every gift. So you can't be a doctor one day and a a veterinarian the next day and a preacher the next day. You have limits, and that's a good thing. It's that place where our culture, especially with our young people, has become so self-absorbed that they've lost sight that there is more to life than themselves. And it's breaking my heart because it's destroying them from the inside out.
How then does this idea of the uniqueness of Jesus Christ and looking at everything through his eyes, how is that a corrective for this kind of expressive individualism that's hurt so many?
As a mom, I want to just say there's more to the world than just you.
Yeah.
And Jesus gives us that model of seeing beyond ourselves. My mom's heart breaks on this issue, really it does, because we can see the destructive nature when we can't look at anything greater than ourselves.
It's important to be called out of ourselves. It's important to be called up into the reality, the way that the world is ordered. Christ literally is the Logos who ordered everything.
Yeah.
It's also important, I think, and these sorts of issues around sexual identity and gender confusion, I think, illustrate this pretty acutely. It's important to tell young people who they are in fact, right? To tell them the truth about their own nature, that they're image bearers of God, made male and female, made with certain physical gifts and with certain physical limitations. And that it's not their job to figure it all out on their own. They don't bear the responsibility of being a professional ballerina and a great statesman. They can choose one thing to pursue or a few things to pursue. And of course, well, if you're looking to elevate their vision of human nature beyond their own subjective experience to what humans were created to do, the ultimate picture of that, of course, is the eschaton man himself, right? Who is both the source of our being and descended to take upon himself our finite nature, and still bears it, right? Yes. An embodied human being sitting at the right hand of God, which is points us, I think, ahead of ourselves a couple of sessions, but getting back to this ultimate hope that the restoration just is the perfection of the nature which God gave us originally. And that's, so I think there's a sense in which the incarnation of Christ is perhaps the most important Christian dogma that we've not yet comprehended the way that we really ought to. I think there's a lot going on in that particular doctrine, which is a corrective to so much of the disembodied Gnosticism that's afflicting us today.
On a very basic level, so, just think about the biblical worldview. So God created us as human beings to live in relationship with him. I mean, we were designed by him to do life in relationship with him. He as king, we as people do life with him, right? The fall came in Genesis 3, of course, the lie was, don't believe. Did God really say, don't believe what he said? You can be like God yourself, right? So that broke the way life was supposed to be lived. So we've got people who are trying to figure out, like, if you're not living life in that relationship with him, you're not finding your identity in him, well, then you're trying to figure it out on your own as king of your own life, right? And it's just not going to work because you're trying to live life outside of the way you were designed to live. And I think what Christ, so much that Christ is, but in the incarnation and in his life, he showed us what it is to live a life the way it was designed to live in oneness with the Father. Right. And so because he had never sinned, he lived the perfect life in that relationship with God. And so we see, and there's so much in the Gospels, but his identity, when he came up at baptism, he came up out of the water and the Father, the dove came and the Father said, you are my well-beloved Son, with you I am well pleased. Or you are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased. And that was his identity. In other words, he's who I am, who Jesus was. I am the beloved Son of the Father. It's who I am. Yeah. And he's pleased with me just because I'm his son. And then in that freedom of, I know who I am, he could go and minister and serve and all the things that he did. And I think so if we're trying to get our identity in anything other than I'm a beloved son or a beloved daughter of the Father, that's who I am. And then I'm free to do life. I'm free to be a doctor, free to be a lawyer, free to be whatever he wants me to do, or how, is that making sense? So you got to get that identity in him.
We are created to identify ourselves by the relationships that give us our being, our callings, our skills, our natural abilities. This is why a lot of people's surnames end in S-O-N, right? Johnson is just to be the son of John. That's who I am.
Yeah.
And of course, for most of human history, that's how one would have identified. I'm of this family, I'm of this tribe, I'm of this village. And so I think part of what we see going on right now, especially with younger people, this drive to identify by my subjective experience. There's a huge ideological component to this, and we've talked about this at some length, and a lot of ideas that are being pushed upon them in university classroom settings, and in media and in movies. It's poisonous, it's destructive, it's pernicious, it's evil. We should call it out. But I think we also need to recognize that part of it is that's providing something that they desperately desire. As a result of the breakdown in Western society of the natural family and local community, and senses of calling and purpose around more practical concerns, meeting the needs of those in my community is seen as a calling. I think we see this in the collapse of the trades. The basic trades that used to be understood to be noble callings, right? And they're denigrated. Motherhood, something that's denigrated tragically in our. And so the breakdown of these sources that used to provide sources of identity, I think young people today grasp at something to substitute for. They need to know who they are. Well, maybe the truth about who I am is this feeling that I identify with, and that's what they have at hand. And so I think the one of the perhaps the most helpful things we can say to them is just teach them who they in fact are, while acknowledging that much of that identity is in fact broken. That in fact this is not who God. This is not how God designed it. He did not design it so that they would grow up without knowing their Father. He would not design it so that they would have to invent their own path forward in terms of their profession and their family life and make it all up from scratch. That's not what he intended.
And that's a great responsibility to try to carry. I mean, it becomes a burden. And so people check out. And again, great opportunity for the church to step in and help people find their roots again.
What are some practical ways that you can think of that we can help people rediscover or perhaps find for the first time their identity in Christ rather than their own subjective experience?
Well, I mean, simply we need to preach the gospel. I mean, the church needs to do a better job of being the church and actually presenting the truth of the gospel into the community, incarnational, getting out there and actually meeting people where they are, engaging them and sharing with them the good news of the kingdom of God, that they can come into that right relationship with God the way they were designed to live. That's available because of Christ, because he came, died, and rose again. He made it possible for us to be in a right relationship with God and to do life the way we were designed to live. So we got to get the message out in a loving, compelling, serving way. But yeah,
I think setting out the propositions is important. I think living it out is at least equally important.
I would say parents, we have a 34-year-old daughter, my husband and I, and I'm guilty of, I remember saying, you can be anything you want to be. And now she's confused about what she really is. And I think that we as parents struggled with wanting to make our children happy and not sometimes telling them the hard truths. I know I'm guilty of that. And we had a conversation earlier with Andrew, and he has a son named Ebenezer.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the fact that someday he knows his son is going to be called Ebenezer Scrooge. And he said, I'm preparing him for these conversations and helping him understand the story. So he really gets the reference and not the the teasing
Right.
reference. And that to me captured what we as parents should be doing, helping kids face the reality that not every kid gets a trophy.
Right. Right.
I think those kind of things we lost sight of and we have to reclaim.
I think also for those young people in our midst who are from broken homes and broken social environments, my experience is a lot of these young people are really genuinely attracted to a healthy marriage, a healthy home life, someone who's content in their professional or avocational callings. To this, just living out the gospel in the mundane aspects of day-to-day life, I think is pretty critically important.
One of the things we teach when we teach evangelism is we know, because we know it's true, and that people, no matter what someone's saying, like, oh, I'm happy because I'm identifying as whatever it is, and they're saying these things, we know if they're not in a right relationship with God through Jesus Christ, it's not going well at some level. So they can say whatever they want, pretend, tell the world around them that they're fine. But when it's dark and they're alone in their room at night and their head hits the pillow, we know it's not.
Yeah.
And so to be able to love them and to be able to say, I think they know deep down. And so when they say, okay, well, there's something better, and once they realize I want that, whatever that is, we can point them to Jesus.
Amen.